one duty tonight, basically, and that is to open the floor for nomination for Chairman of the Board of Rutherford County School Board. Mr. Black.
Mr. Odom, I'd like to nominate Mr. Terry Hodge for our new chairman.
Any other nominations?
Move nomination cease.
Second.
The nomination cease, okay. Elected by acclamation. Okay. And a second of that, all in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Does that suffice, or do we need to vote on the motion, Ms. Joyce? Is that okay? Okay, we're good. Mr.
Congratulations, Todd.
One slightly used gavel.
Before we get started, let me just say I appreciate everyone's vote on this, and I'll assure y'all I'll try to do the best job I can. Try to keep us all happy, I guess. Guess next time this we need to vote for a vice chair, so I'll open up nominations.
I'll nominate Wayne Blair as vice chair.
Any others? Nomination ceased. All in favor of Mr. Blair being vice chair, speak up.
Aye. Thank you very much. I appreciate the honor. Thank you.
This is our second meeting for the zoning of Stewart's Creek High School. I think the first meeting, I think everybody can probably agree that the first meeting went pretty well. I don't think there's a whole lot of changes that have been made, but I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Odom and Mr. Morgan, and they can let us know what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. I'd like to begin by answering some questions that came up in our last meeting. So you should have a document follow-up from August 13th, 2012. You should have that maybe in your packet, and we'll kind of address some of those. I mean, you can read some more. The first one was dealing with I-80 as a boundary, and we talked about, when we looked at the map before, if you remember, Mr. Blair, you were asking a question about some of this area over here, about going back to Smyrna, I mean, with all of that. And probably the best answers is coming from our transportation department. One, with the lines like they are now, it matches the Siegel Middle School zone. So that's one advantage. Unless you're going to change both of those, the kids would still be with their peers and go to Siegel Middle. I think the second one that's most noteworthy there is near the bottom of that page. There's some roads to the north of 840 which dead end and do not have access to 840, which would cause a bus to travel into the Siegel zone to gain access to Smyrna High School. And really, we find out up there in number one, it would take additional buses in order to accomplish this. Because, you know, with 840 being minimal access road, some of the other roads were cut off. So it's not included in our recommendation tonight to change that line for basically those two reasons, the Siegel Middle and because of the additional buses that would be required to accomplish that. So that kind of answers one of that. Mr. Kelly asked about capacity and had Mr. Clardy do that for us, and that would be in this sheet. You have another document that says capacity. And what Mr. Clardy has done, he is using and he has a plan for what's chosen. It's the Council of Educational Facilities Planners International. And so there is a percent that they recommend to consider occupancy, what it should be at capacity. And so he's used that number. So very quickly, if we can kind of take a look at that, if you'll flip to page 2, the numbers in red are under capacity. The numbers in the black are over capacity. But now your difference in here, even in his numbers, he is counting the portables that are there. So when you sometimes see that you are under capacity, it includes the portables that are already there. So the red numbers. Now, your other issue is that very often the school is not at the location where you need the extra capacity. You know, that's what happens in the business we're in with the 45 schools. But the first one are your elementary schools, with some capacity, including portables. The second one is your middle schools. Basically, you see your middle schools are the ones that really are the ones that are over capacity in many instances when you look at that. And the last one is your high schools. Okay, so that'll give you some numbers to digest and look at some more when you consider that. But I just really wanted to point out to you, and the page 6 in there is the Central Magnet, Thurman Francis, and all. And then they also got 5 is our alternative schools and Holloway. So that information is for you to digest and look at some more. And that was in response to Mr. Kelly's question. Do you have a question about it now? If you do, we talk about it. It may be one of those things you just want to study for a while.
Is the reason Oakland is so over capacity is because we don't have the same number of portables
You do not. You see,
there like we do at Riverdale?
we have 20 portables or so that live there. In fact, he may have the number of portables there. If not, we've got it in another document, I know. Okay. That very often explains it. You have 149 portables in the system. So part of our capacity, in fact, I was speaking to Kiwanis today, and I told them we have almost 2 schools in portables, actually. Students still in portable housing. So it's kind of a sobering thought, even with the building that we have been doing. Kind of going back to some of the follow-up, if we could. The question came up, was made, and Mr. Jernigan asked a question about how far is the town of Smyrna extend into sewer? So the next page, Shane was able to get this information for us. So the next page in that, behind that, tells you the force main actually ends at the creek just past Red Hawk Drive. Of course, Red Hawk Drive comes into the Stewart's Creek area. You know, but that's the sewer, which answers the question Mr. Jernigan asked. That. You're actually running water much further than that. You know. The next page, that's the enrollment summary, basically is the summary on 6/1, 2012 percentages and counts, that sort of thing. Then the enrollment summary for those pages. We included for you today another sheet, which actually was our enrollment after Memorial Day. So you have this sheet that's broken down by school and by grade. And Rutherford County at this time has 39,941 students in grades K through 12. That's an increase of 1,333 over the end of last year. We've had that much growth. Last year, the growth, in one of our pages in here, we do that, where last year the growth was 519. We haven't seen this larger growth until 2006-07, in that range, when we saw 1,800 students that one year. So this is one of the largest growths that we've had in some time, and looking at that. That 39,941 does not include 220 of the preschool programs. It started out as the Governor's Preschool. If you remember, it's not Governor's Preschool. It's funded differently now by the state, but it's preschool programs. So we are officially over 40,000, you know, if you consider those. They just do not count on your normal ADM, so we do not normally report it that way. They're reported differently than any other category. So that's kind of some information, I think, covers that. Do you have other questions or something, and we'll talk a little bit about the map, if we could? Okay. the changes, we've made a couple of changes from the one that you saw last time. First, I think I might want to address something, the editorial that was in the News Journal last weekend, which was talking about this area right up here. Said, why don't you go over I-24 and pick up that area and add it to Laverne High School. So Shane ran some numbers for that. Up in this corner, right in there, you have a housing area that's low-income housing. There's about 300 there, and it was it 134 high school students in that area. Actually, if you actually bring them over, you're going to probably increase the numbers of free reduced socioeconomic that you would have at Laverne High. Now there's an area next to it which comes out the other street, but again, that would be a little bit higher income, but if you, again, you'll be doing some spot zoning that you're gonna have to transport students through, since it's bordered by I-24, you're gonna have to transport them through one zone to get to another. But that's just simply trying to address why we looked at that. We looked at that area when we were doing the planning. But I just thought because it was an editorial that you have additional questions or something, we can talk about that or look at it, okay? The other area that we did, was down here. We took a look at Blackman, and what really shocked us this time, and if you'll look at, of course, the enrollment sheet again, the enrollment increase at Blackman this year, and it's been interesting of all of our high schools, there's 167 additional students this year. Oakland High gained 165, and Smyrna High has gained 172 over the end of last year. So those three high schools basically showing most of our growth in the high school area, even though the others have considerable growth too. I mean, even Laverne High has a growth of 76 this year. So we're seeing quite an increase in high school enrollment. But because we have 167 students increased at Blackman, we looked at some areas that really have not developed much, and that's on this side of the H40 in there. So the change that you see from the one that we looked at in August would be to pick up some areas that are undeveloped. Because if we do start developing again, there's about 40 students in that would be impacted to do this. But it might save you from coming back in a couple of years if that were to start developing, the economy turns around, and then lo and behold, you've got all of those in Blackman again, because Blackman still has some room for growth. Actually, Smyrna, Laverne has very little room for growth, simply because of the boundaries and the way that it's been built out. But when you take a look at Stewart's Creek, it's certainly going to be a place for growth. And in this area, most of this area still remains pretty much undeveloped as the sewer and the water comes out there. So our recommendation tonight would be to add those to this area right in here. It's basically undeveloped, okay? The other thing is we talked more, and some of the board members spoke and all again, in looking at the area in Smyrna. Since Smyrna cannot grow very much anymore, we looked at adding, if you remember before, we had one little area for Smyrna right in here. It would be to go ahead and add this area back to Smyrna, so that all of this and this together would go to Smyrna High School. I think that may change free reduce by 1% or so, had almost no impact on that, right?
Actually reduced it by 2%.
2%, okay. But bringing that area, but it would be our recommendation now, again, to look at that particular line to increase by Smyrna. That changes some of our numbers a little bit. Stewart's Creek High initially 1589. Again, if you choose to do grandfathering, these numbers represent if everybody were to transfer, and that historically has not happened. You know, it takes about 3 years anyway to begin to talk about that before you can kind of see the numbers. And then you have 2% growth kind of built into that also if we maintain that. So that's basically the area. We have one other little spot that I'll show you right here. There's one student that lives right here. And for us to transport that student, we have to come all the way from Florence Road down here, pick that student up, bring them back, and take them over here to Stewart's Creek High School. They're really very close to Blackman. It actually saves the system money by including that particular area in the Blackman High so that you're not running a bus down there to pick up one student. That's farmland, it's open, it's not developed. So that's the other change that's in there from the original. I would prefer, really, if, and again, it's your call, but as we go to our public meetings, my preference would be for us to make one presentation rather than several options, and let the public comment on where they think, comment on where they would like the line to be, or look at other areas. And Shane can, if we want to pick an area, we can look at numbers and information related to that. Sometimes it's confusing if you put 3 or 4 options out there. Now, which one are we talking about now? But, so that would be my preference, but again, that's your call, is what you would like us to do. So I guess we're ready for questions or other information if you'd like for Mr. Morgan to answer. Yes, sir.
My understanding from talking to some builders that, and there's some construction going on now, certainly not on the level that we had a couple of years ago, but maybe a year to 2 years of actual developed lots ready to be built on at this time.
Yes.
That, and again, maybe in a year or 2 there won't be any developed lots. So I just think if you build it, they will come, and if there's not any developed lots, what better than to develop near a high school? And I think we've seen it in the past, and I don't know why that would change for the future. When Siegel, and none of us, Joyce, I guess you were in secretary then, but when Siegel was open, what kind of population did it have? Does anybody remember?
Mr. Tackett may know better than.
That's
I
true.
thought I just read that.
Did?
Is there?
1,378.
Okay. And it didn't take them long to grow pretty quick after that. And, I'd hate for us to fill up Stewart's Creek without giving it some growth area, some growth room. And
That was actually part of the editorial also, suggesting that the board look at allowing growth for
yes, sir.
Stewart's Creek High School.
Well, I'm not plagiarizing because I didn't remember any of it. But,
We were already thinking that.
but I think that gives them the opportunity to expand.
I got just a couple questions here.
Okay.
Well, you got these 40 students on this undeveloped land. I'm just curious, if it's undeveloped, how do you get a number of 40?
It basically doesn't contain major subdivisions.
That's
I mean,
true.
they're houses.
It's mainly agricultural, and there are some rental properties out that way that are on large tracts of land.
It's undeveloped right now, correct?
As far as subdivision, it's
And the next question, on Stewart's Creek, we got 1589. That's what you estimate without allowing juniors and seniors to come, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You don't have any idea, I don't guess, what that could be?
Past experience has been that the vast majority of people, juniors and seniors, because of clubs, organizations, athletics, tend to stay where they are.
I think a lot of that's the way it gets packaged, and I think we saw that with Oakland and Siegel when that happened. I think we have to be as careful as we can be to make sure each school are marketable. That's the right word to use. And I think there was some situation when the Oakland Siegel thing happened that Oakland became less marketable. I got people don't time for whatever reason might be, we're not going to do that. But I think that, to me, the number of students that are grandfathered in this coming through the Stewart's Creek will be based a lot on that. And I was also involved with Smyrna and Laverne, and that was a really difficult situation because about half of the students that were zoned to Laverne High School were citizens in the city of Smyrna. So, given the fact that there was a Smyrna High School, that was a really difficult sale. And I made a comment then, and I know Laverne citizens or Smyrna citizens wanted it. That's why I brought up that meeting. But from a standpoint of someone teaching, living in Murfreesboro, going into that situation, would have been better off if they were in school A and school B, as opposed to having Laverne High School taking a half of Smart High School. So I think there's some of that we just have to be aware of. And a lot of it will have to do with how many teachers go to what school is what. You know, that can be a difficult thing too, though. The principal's gonna have something to do with that. There's gonna be a lot of factors that are involved in making sure that we keep them as marketable as we can on each side, or all three sides. We've got 5 schools involved. A lot of marketing to do.
Well, my intention as director would be to put some restrictions on, we'll work with instruction. We are not going to simply say to the principal in New Stewart's Creek, interview anyone you want and you can take them, because we're not going to empty a department or something like that. We have to have some guidelines in developing that so that both schools can maintain experienced staff. You know, we're not, our intention is to not let that happen. I think it's fair to all of the students to do that. One of the first steps we typically is to let teachers apply if they want to, but then we have to go back and trace backward from that and say how many are from the math department, how many are from the English language arts department or foreign language, because our obligation is to staff both schools. So we'll try to keep that.
Mr. Holliday?
I know that there is a published calendar of the next events and such. I don't see it in any of our packets here, and I'm not familiar with it enough to know it by memory. Is the next event then community
17th.
meetings?
17th.
Was one that you had planned for you, a third one if you need a third one, and the 24th is at Blackman, I believe I'm correct. But we can get you the whole list.
In a community meeting where we're truly going to be perhaps fielding questions from the community and such, what concerns do you anticipate from past history, from the discussions here at the central office? Is it appropriate for us as a board to have any discussion or offer any perspective on those issues of how many faculty transfer from which direction? Is that part of what you would expect the board to share insight on?
We can. You do not know the exact number until you really get down to the enrollment situation. Now, we'll know from the course situation, basically, that we're obviously going to need this many. A lot of that, though, after you do enrollment in the spring, you'll begin to tell. As a board, probably the question that you'll get asked very quickly is, if you decide to grandfather juniors and seniors, how about the siblings? You know, you'll have to make a decision on that. We have not accounted for siblings in this. And they'll ask you about rising, you know, 8th graders that would be a freshman. You know, what are you going to do about that? That tends to be the one. Most of the other questions deal with the same thing that you deal with normally in a zoning situation about where my child has to go in the afternoon, or all of those issues, because basically your freshmen, sophomores do not drive, for sure, and some of your juniors. So that's not really different from the other. Content, we can be prepared to tell them about. The offerings, the CTE offerings, you know, those schools will remain, career and technical education. All of the other courses, basically our high schools are pretty much the same. And you could tell from the other night in the Latin question you asked me, I mean, that's being offered everywhere it was with, you know, Eagle and Holloway. So we strive to, regardless of where a student goes in Rutherford County Schools, that they have the option of the courses to take. And I think that's important to us as a board and me as a director to see that you're not going to be shortchanged by staying or going somewhere.
Likewise, it's our intention to open Stewart's Creek High School with all of the peripheral and activities that we would see at any other Rutherford County school.
Sure. I mean, the clubs and things will come. We have applied to TSSAA. That comes up, they'll vote November 15th maybe, or something like that. So that will be in. Typically, the first couple of years in athletics are a little tough 'cause
But present.
But you may not have as many juniors and seniors. But that's happened to every high school that we've opened, I think, over the years that you run into that. But all of that's in place. Go forward.
With new brick and mortar, you know, students will want to gravitate towards that. But also your certified and classified employees will want to drift towards that too. And I think if you can maintain the academic integrity of having the experienced and the new teachers and staff coming in to all the schools, you know, in an equal portion, you know, it won't take away the, like Tim said, the marketing ability of that campus. If you don't lose all your really good teachers and staff members to the new school.
And if we can financially make this happen, you'll back me in this, with Laverne increasing in their ratio, socioeconomically disadvantaged, I think you need to staff them at a ratio that allows them to address those issues, a little bit smaller pupil-teacher ratio with other resources. And we've done this many times before. We did it at Central Middle, and we've done it in other places where we have Title I basically goes to schools. It's based upon those numbers, socioeconomic numbers. They receive additional support, so that's very common in this. And of course, one of our Title I schools is a reward school this time, you know, one of the 6 and all. So you can do that. We have experience in doing that.
One thing about the public meetings, you don't know what you're going to get till you get there, so it'll be interesting.
If I may, I want to follow up on what Mr. Odom said about one plan. I think that is, for me, clearly the direction we need to be, not get into a B, C, D, E situation. Mr. Morgan, Mr. Odom, transportation, human resources, I don't know, have all studied this far more than I had the ability to study. I don't know how many different graphs and charts and numbers that you look at. But I said this last time and I'll say it again. I am extremely impressed that we are basing this upon statistical data as opposed to just drawing lines where they look good. That's what I can support. And for me, in a public meeting, to try to usurp those information data sheets, I think would be, for me, a mistake. And I think, yes, we all received an email about one student being in one place. I mean, are there situations like that we need to come back and
There could be
consider?
others.
Absolutely. We should. But I think, to me, I think we need to be very careful as a board to go a direction that steers very far from what this data is indicating to us, and take it, digest it. I think to me, we're there more to listen and then take time to study and respond appropriately as opposed to responding a whole lot on those particular nights.
Yeah, I agree with your past experiences. I think it helps me. I know it's helped me to get the feedback from the residents who have been affected. That there's been times there's been things brought to my attention that I haven't thought of. So, and sometimes you change your mind. So, you know, I think I'm about like you, Mr. Tackett, to sit back and listen after Mr. Odom and Shane present everything, and go from there, I guess.
We want to answer your questions, though, because you're the public. We obviously call you, and especially if you're in one of these represented areas. And I mean, if you need an area, street area, Shane has the ability to do that. And we can give you counts, numbers, socioeconomic information.
Have the new board members been given this quadrant map? I think that I found that to be extremely helpful in actually picking out where the students are. I think that would be very helpful for them to have that.
Absolutely, or we can, do it our next meeting. We'll email it, go ahead and email it to you if you'd like us to print you a colored copy, we can do that. That's where the little grid overlay you're talking about has smaller areas of how many students are in each of those little
Yes,
grid
sir.
overlays.
And at what point do we make the decision of what to do as far as the grandfather is concerned? We've talked about what has historically been done, but we need to be armed with that information. And to me, as soon as possible, we can share that information with people.
That will control the number of people that ask to speak that evening. If you feel like you want to grandfather and you go into the meeting saying that, then some people, that's gonna be their question. That's going to be their concern. You know, if you're gonna grandfather juniors and seniors, then they would not necessarily see a need to address you again over that. But if you don't, then I think we know from experience they're probably gonna ask that.
They should.
They should, right. And so at some time we have to do that, this meeting or the next meeting, probably before we actually, you know, go to the first one on the 24th, we need to, in my opinion, probably decide that piece. Not that you can't add something to it, but change it at some other time, as information develops.
I just wanted to compliment, I think the portion south of 840 that has been added to the Stewart's Creek zone is outstanding insight. It is undeveloped land. It does not have a dramatic impact on the student body, but it really shows a long-range perspective there. Even though we do have similar challenges there that we discussed on the northeastern side where 840 cuts across. I assume we'll have some of those same challenges there with crossroads and things of that nature, 840 being limited access. So I think it's the right plan, but is there, you know, is there anything that we should consider there with the limited access being south of 840 that
Mike
area?
looked at it, so.
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem there. You've got other major roads. You've got 96 that comes in there, then you've got the ability to cut over at Veterans Parkway. You've got the ability to cut over at Hamilton Road. So there's a lot more major arteries that will allow us to connect over
Okay.
versus up at the other end. You don't have that up there.
The other thing to consider too is that there's not a large body of water running right through the middle of what you're trying to talk about.
Very true. Okay.
So the high schoolers could take their Jeep and get, okay.
So the 17th is still a board meeting of just up, or it is public discussion?
That's regular.
You set aside 3.
Just like
Okay.
tonight.
Like tonight.
That would, not to interrupt, that'd be my next question. Do we want to discuss what kind of guidelines we'd be looking at as far as,
How long and that sort of thing.
do we want to do that tonight, or does everybody want to think about it and come back on the 17th and nail something down?
I think it would be appropriate to at least discuss it, you know, the 17th, then we would come back, you know, perhaps with some actual motions and proposals. There may be something that we discussed tonight that needs further consideration. So we do have the issue of grandfathering in juniors and seniors, the question of siblings. Are there any other pitfalls that we would need to take? And is it appropriate, do we take action or do we bring a recommendation? Do we save all action for after the public discussion, you know, to December? What do, I don't see Mr. Reed here.
I would wait until I had heard from all entities.
Right.
My recommendation, and I think that was stated earlier, that instead of trying to make an action based upon the Blackman group that's there tonight, that you hear from other parts and then you'll get back together, and you're gonna have all your pieces of the request from your parents and that information. Then it'll be better to make that decision at that time, to me. If you would like, Ms. Michaels, do we happen to have, or you have probably on your computer, maybe the agenda, how we operated before, how we did that? We could share that with them. You could see if you wanted to change how we handle the evening, the discussion, that sort of thing.
So do that on the next meeting?
We could, if you wanted to do that.
But we bring one proposal, I think that we're moving in the direction of a consensus that at the September 17th meeting, that we would center in on a proposal that was accompanied with a tendency, or, a recommendation, I don't know what the right terminology is for that we're leaning in the direction of grandfathering juniors and seniors. I don't know where, I don't really gain a temperament from the board as to where we are on siblings.
I can, what my thinking would be, Mr. Holiday, is next meeting, we basically do like what you're saying, is a recommended plan, which we've got it here, then discuss, unless the board wants to do it tonight, discuss, primarily, I think the only other issues is junior, senior, letting them go. I know with the sibling deal, I know when I come on the board, it was something that followed us for years. So my first thought would be you just limit it to juniors and seniors.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Mr. Evans is experienced with that. Last time about how many, number of years siblings.
Typically, if you grandfather a lot of siblings, what we see is that it affects zoning for several years because it's impossible to anticipate how many siblings the family may have. You think you may get restrained on 2 years, but there's always a third one coming in. And we generally don't try to keep families together. We don't want to separate them. So it just gets real messy when you start grandfathering multiple years of siblings. And it can take multiple years for your zoning to actually get to where you originally intended it to be.
I guess my only caveat to that would be that I would not be for a sibling rule to allow someone who's in middle school or elementary school to follow. But if you've got maybe a brother or a sister that's a senior and they happen to be a sophomore or junior freshman, I would be a little more receptive to that type of sibling rule rather than have one just goes on perpetually, from a family. So, and our new board members are just getting avalanched with new stuff right now, and you probably would like to have probably another meeting to digest everything that's coming your way. Am I correct with that?
You're very correct.
Okay.
Can I ask, back to Mr. Evans, the long term, when you talk about, it just goes on and on and on. Past policies have been all siblings, or is that happening?
Typically, the board has said, if you have a sibling when you enter high school, so that it's at the same school. But Mr. Blair's example is a perfect example of what I was talking about. Let's say you have one that's going to be a senior, one that's going to be a sophomore, and the board's intention is to make sure they're at the same high school together. But then the sophomore becomes a senior, and at that point, there was a third sibling that was in 8th grade that is now in high school. Do you make them separate? So you have to draw a line somewhere, and that's those things that are it's so hard to anticipate all the different scenarios that it can play out for years. The Riverdale Blackman rezoning that you guys did 4 years ago, I think it's actually 5 years ago, the rezoning, the grandfather option only expired this past year. It took 4 years for it to play out. And it's one of those things you don't necessarily see it until you're in the middle of it and you realize that there's some other siblings involved. So that's what Mr. Odom and I have discussed, is just trying to decide where that line should be and then trying to stick to it.
And on that, it may just happen to be, this is a one-time deal. If you're here now, and you choose to stay, that sibling doesn't get to go because you were not on that campus at that time. So, but those are things that we can discuss too, and try to come to grips with. So.
Does that answer your question?
It did, I mean, you know, my thought process coming in before we discussed it tonight would be to go back to an incoming freshman, go back that far and no farther back, which would mean, you know, families will have a tough choice, and that's the part of it. They want to stay at the school that they have some allegiance to, or they want to split the family, or they want to stay together and move to a new school. And, you know, my thought that, you know, if you're important enough that you stay together, then you have the option to stay together by going to the school that you're going to, as opposed to going to all the grandfather stuff. And it will be difficult.
Well, and you all know how difficult it is when we get zoning commission appeals, that we typically don't want to separate the families, and that's, you know, if we're in a situation like that, we try to let them go, but I just, you know, you have to eventually say, we've got to cut it off somewhere.
Well, like I say, the point is we don't have to separate the family. If the family makes this, if they want the family to be together, they have that option to do that by going to this zone school as opposed to taking the grandfather option with the older child and not with the younger child.
Yeah, whatever is decided, as long as we make sure it's well-known up front, I think that's exactly what, you know, they get that choice up front, so.
We've had 10 solid years of training for our Rutherford County parents because we've been building schools, we've been rezoning. So if you built a house in Rutherford County, the chance of you going to the school you thought you were going to is probably not very good because we've built so many in the last 10 years. So
I will ask Mr. Morgan also, if, looking at some of our new lines, to also do another sheet so you'll know how many students will be moved. Like how many will be leaving Riverdale. We had the other numbers, but with the other area that we have added now that the board seems to like these changes, we probably need to redo those numbers, like how many will be leaving Riverdale, how many will be leaving Blackman, you know, in the net, how many will be leaving.
Based on grandfathering option.
Would you want to do that based on the grandfathering option? I think.
I think that's good information.
Junior and senior.
Just, the only caution I have is to remember that that's the worst case scenario.
Absolutely. Is it possible for us to put in place, I've certainly heard from the director and know it to be true here at the central office, our commitment is to education. Our commitment is to making sure that we have an outstanding faculty at every school. But is there any way that we can offer the public assurance that not more than 15% of any faculty of one particular school would be allowed to, you know, there are going to be all kinds of dynamics. You mentioned a specific department or this or that or the other. But if there are concerns expressed from the public of, boy, this school is just going to be, you know, rated of our finest faculty members or something of that nature, is there a statement that could be held out there that the central office would be comfortable with, doesn't handicap you in any way from having the discretion? I know that your discretion is what I really have confidence in, but if there are those in the general public who question that, is there any kind of threshold we could put in place?
It's difficult to say what percentage until you see how many students take your option. I would hate to say no more than 15. I mean, it might be 12 might be a better number, or it could be 18 or something like that until you kind of see that enrollment. Because what we do, basically, our high schools typically start the enrollment period around the 1st of March. And so they do that because they're building classes for the next year, how many of each type. Mr. Tackett knows what we're talking about.
Second week of March.
Yeah, you're in it very much to be specific. So when they do that and you begin to see your numbers, then you know, I'm going to need this many math teachers. I will need this many CTE, this many social studies, and that's where we go back and look. And sometimes you even find yourself that if one school were to lose more students, they might not go to Stewart's Creek, but you might need it. I mean, obviously Riverdale's going to lose some. So are some of the Riverdale teachers may have to go all the way over to Stewart's Creek. I mean, it's not just a domino effect when you get into staffing. So it's difficult to set a percentage.
Don't discount the idea that when you said they have to skip over, many will want to.
They will.
That are,
New bricks.
And I think you'll also find that this is not negative or derogatory toward any teacher, but there will be some situations where it's the best move for that principal and that teacher to separate and move into different schools. So sometimes the principals will know more, I think, of what that number needs to be. And I think you're right on target. We do need, I think we need to be clear with our statement that we're going to be on top of that and not allow any disproportionate number. But I think the number is really difficult to tackle right now.
And I think with this being televised and taped, with it being in the minutes and with our media professional here, Mr. Odom has made that commitment. So I think the public should know and can know that commitment to not purge these campuses has been made publicly.
One other point to go back to, you're dealing with a much larger number of schools here too than you did with the last time this zoning took place. I mean, clear there was two schools that became easier to quantify the numbers here. As you say, some teachers from Riverdale will need to transfer some way or another, certainly some from Blackman, from Laverne, I would assume, and from Smyrna. And so I think the possibility of one school getting a disproportionate number of teachers lost is not nearly as great as it could be if it was just two schools involved.
Good point. Good point.
Anything else? I think if I understood Mr. Blair correctly, I think consensus is we'll meet on the 17th and try to set up some kind of guidelines at that time. So, if you have any questions, call Mr. Odom or Shane there, and we'll reconvene then and try to have a final plan. I think we're pretty, based on what I've seen, I think we're pretty well on what y'all laid out. I think we just need to come up with, like I said, the guidelines on the junior, senior deal or siblings or whatever we're going to do, and walk away that night ready for the Blackman hearing. When is that, 24th? 24th, okay. Anybody else have anything on regards to this? Let me just say, let me apologize first, I guess, for not welcoming the new board members. We got Miss Helen Blankenship over here on the end, Mr. David Nipper, and Mr. Corey Young. I'd just like to welcome each of you, and I think we'll all work out a good long time, I believe. Mr. Blair?
I'd like to ask the new board members to embrace their TSBA training. I think you'll find that enjoyable, and the learning aspect is pretty incredible. And the neat thing is that the school board, to my knowledge, the only elected official that has to have training, and it is, the TSBA does an excellent job. And again, I think when you walk away from the orientations and the different modules, I think you'll find it well worth your time, and it will just be so advantageous to you. So please embrace that training.
Anything further? Any comments? Everybody good? We'll steal a phrase from Mr. Rick Wise when he was chairman. After every board meeting, Rick would always say, "All minds at ease." And, if it's not, speak up. And, other than that, we'll see everybody 17th?
Yes, sir.
5:30.